Perfect. Glad everybody's here. I'll get started with the introductions. If you don't already know, my name is Esty McCaig, and I'm the president of the Young World Federalists. And we're a youth movement which aims to build support for world federalism around the world. Today, April 22nd, 2024, marks the 300th anniversary of Immanuel Kant's birthday. Kant was born all the way back in 1724 in the Kingdom of Prussia, in the city now known as Kaliningrad in Russia. As a philosopher, Kant was concerned with supranational governance and the nation-state system. He theorized a sort of world confederation to ensure what he called perpetual peace. These ideas have inspired generations to think beyond the confines of countries and to question the order that dominates global governance. This year, the United Nations is embarking on an extremely rare review and reform process known as the Summit of the Future. This is an opportunity for UN member states to reflect on the state of the United Nations and to bring fresh ideas for how the UN may be able to help address so many mounting global crises. With wars and famines, climate disaster, human rights abuses, and technological uncertainties combining to create one of the most tumultuous times in human history since the Second World War, there's never been a better time to ask ourselves, how can we do better? Today, we have four global governance experts gathered to discuss how Kant's ideas may be relevant for the Summit of the Future. I'll introduce them all before turning the floor over to each of them for sort of opening statements on these ideas, and then we'll move over into a moderated panel discussion before opening the floor up to a Q&A with the audience. For you in the audience, you're invited to ask your questions in the chat at any time, and I'll do my best to gather them for the Q&A later. But of course, the best you can do is simply raise your virtual hand during the Q&A and ask your question yourself. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Young World Federalists website and YouTube in the coming days. And now I'll introduce our panelists, starting with Maya Graf. Maya is an international lawyer based in The Hague and a convener of the Climate Governance Commission, dedicated to proposing global governance innovations to address climate change. She has an extensive experience in the development and administration of multilateral treaties and has taught at institutions such as the Hague Academy of International Law and Leiden University. Among many more engagements, she has been an advisor to Democracy Without Borders since 2021. Fernando Iglesias is a member of the Parliament of Argentina and a chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He is a Magister on International Affairs in Bologna and the co-president of the World Federalist Movement Institute for Global Policy. Fernando leads the campaign for the Latin American and Caribbean Criminal Court against Transnational Organized Crime, or COPLA, and is a founding member of Democracia Global, Movimiento por la Unión Sudamérica y el Parlamento Mundial. And next we have Luisa Tumanelli. She holds master's degrees in philosophy and has been actively involved in the Young European Federalists and the Union of European Federalists since the mid-1980s. She's currently serving as the Secretary National of the Movimiento Federalista Europeo, or UEF Italy. Tumanelli demonstrates a strong commitment to recruitment and training activities. Between 1988 and 2001, Tumanelli served as the deputy director of the Spinelli Institute, where she oversaw the organization of the Ventatene International Seminar, which is a wonderful opportunity for young people. I've been myself, and it was very enlightening, and I loved it. And lastly, of course, we have Joe Leinen. He's a German politician and former member of the European Parliament, so MEP, from 1999 to 2019. A member of the Social Democratic Party and a party of European socialists, Leinen is widely recognized for his advocacy in environmental and foreign affairs, as well as support for federal Europe. Joe has held various positions within the SPD, including Europe Secretary of the SPD Youth Committee, member of the SPD Environment Committee, and member of the Europe Commission of the SPD since 1996. Wow. That is a lot of combined experience and intelligence we have gathered here, and I'm very excited to hear where this discussion will go and all of your thoughts. So first, like I said, I'd like to open it up to sort of opening statements on Kant and on the Summit of the Future. And so first, I'll turn it over to Maya Graf. Yeah.
All Great. Thank you so much, Eston, and lovely to be with all of you on this very august occasion. I'm so excited that you're celebrating one of my favorite philosophers, actually. So this is wonderful. So my main point, I guess, for opening remarks is that Kantian perspectives are extremely relevant, remain extremely relevant today, and sort of highlights for why I think his thought is so relevant is that he advocates for basic ethics and the application of reason and rationality to international affairs. Um, he establishes in this respect a duty, a moral duty to establish durable peace, a permanent peace, which he says is so obviously rationally desirable. And of course, we can all see the rationality of having peaceful conditions. And he also sketches key pathways to such a durable peace or sustainable peace in his work, in his famous essay, Perpetual Peace from 1795. And in terms of where we are today, we are only part way down this road, this pathway to establishing conditions for durable peace. Um, so firstly, just a few thoughts from his Perpetual Peace essay. Because of the moral imperatives, which are rational imperatives, he argues, he says a state of peace, establishing a state of peace is an immediate duty. It should be an immediate duty on all of us. And he then, moreover, says the way that we establish sustainable peace is by way of a firm covenant of peace amongst nations. So a covenant that is strong enough that it is not a mere one-off peace treaty, but it has the necessary features to put an end to war forever. And a key component of this covenant would be every state yielding to the coercion of public laws. So this means, of course, binding, enforceable international law among states, um, into also a kind of union of peoples of the world. So he has this very strong view of a peaceful world, the peoples of the world living side by side in a kind of confederation. So this kind of vision, of course, remains vitally relevant, and what I'm seeing missing in most of our environments, including lead up to Sun of the Future, is this long-term vision and awareness of these various necessary components. So Kant is writing within social contract theory. He's applying sort of social contract theory from Hobbes or others. They applied at the state level. He's applying it to the international level, that states should contract together to establish centralized authority in order to have, to pursue their own enlightened self-interest. So I think a lot of this thinking was present at the time of the UN Charter formation and negotiations, but then sort of that vision has largely been lost and forgotten, and therefore we remain really in a state of arrested development of the international system on this pathway towards a truly durable, sustainable peace. And the type of philosophical rigor that Kant represents is likewise really lacking in our current conditions and discourses. So one key piece of Kantian thinking that I think is vitally important and would represent the next step forward for the international community, because the charter, the UN Charter, of course, represented a decision by states to come together in a binding agreement. The Charter is preeminent international law. It now embraces essentially all of humanity that have accepted the Charter as obligatory international law. So we see a sort of confederation, of course, of states in the United Nations. But a key missing piece to this, and what Kant highlights, is the rule of law coercive powers, enforceable international law, our international judicial institutions remain largely voluntary and very weak in terms of enforcement powers. So I've proposed in a number of policy briefs a sort of rule of law package, which I can talk about more later. For example, one example is to modernize the International Court of Justice and also make it just simply a mandatory court for all UN members. So the proposals in this rule of law package would be like a next progressive step forward towards the Kantian vision. So I guess in terms of the sum of the future, I haven't seen such important structural ideas really seriously put forward by various UN member states, nor in the discourse, likewise, any really serious structural steps forward that would advance us further on this Kantian path, which I think is, again, a very, very rational path. It's an obvious path and is still so very relevant. And I think part of the remedy for this is that we need a philosophical vision. We need thinkers who are active in the international system, who can merge the ethical, the rational, and the practical, and set these ideas forth in the international community in diplomatic discourses. And I think the persuasiveness of sort of his core arguments still are very powerful today, but we're just not seeing representatives of the ideas. And just a note of positivity and optimism is that, of course, even one person in a diplomatic posting or one small nation, any nation can make a big difference in the international system just by putting forward, core philosophical, rational, moral ideas that serve the whole international community. So I'll just stop there with my short introductory remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Definitely food for thought for later. But I'll pass immediately on to Joe Leinen.
Yeah, thanks, Eden, for this wonderful opportunity to reflect on Immanuel Kant 300 years ago and the world of today. Now, as you know, I published a book with Andreas Bummel about a democratic world parliament, a cosmopolitan vision was the title. And you could see that not only 300 years ago, but 3,000 years ago, people thought about the one world, the one family, the one planet. So this idea of a global community was existing again and again. And of course, this is a beautiful moral and philosophical vision, as Maya was saying, that got lost in the Cold War, and it gets lost in the new Cold War more and more. So Kant had various big thoughts. And I think the basis was that the individual human being is responsible for what she or he is doing. So the categorical imperative, don't do something to somebody else that you don't want that somebody else does to you. That's the categorical imperative, as it was called. And at the time, which was revolutionary, is that we need free thinking. We need the possibility to think what we want and not what the king is wanting and what the church is wanting. So he was really a revolutionary in that sort of breakthrough in the Enlightenment, that everybody has the capacity to think rational, what is good and what is bad, and to really have the courage to think against authorities that are not able to be rational and to serve the good. So at the end, I think he was a pioneer for democracy, for free thinking and individual free thinking and collective free thinking. And indeed, I think one solution for our problem would be if all countries would serve democratic principles. Because democracies at least don't make wars against each other. Democracies make wars, as we have seen, in the US and others, but against each other, I have not an example, at least not in the last 70 years. So let's say the human rights of everybody to think freely, to express herself, himself freely, is a cornerstone of what we need for, let's say, a one-world philosophy and one-world thinking. But then, of course, he thought through at the time with all the dignitaries, the kings, the dukes, other dignitaries that have existed. And he said the evil is what we call national sovereignty. Yeah, that people are divided artificially by what is called national sovereignty or sovereignty, whether it's a duke or the other dignitaries or kings or whatsoever, an emperor. It is always separating people, those who are in and those who are out. And as François Mitterrand was saying in the European Parliament, nationalism at the end means war. At the very end, it means war. It can take a longer time, but nationalism means war. So I think we as federalists, we have understood that very well, that you have to go beyond national structures and national governance systems. And Maya was rightly saying that, let's say, global structures that we need, not only continental ones, are the must of this 21st century. And Kant was clearly saying he wants a world republic. But then I read his quotes. He said, I know that the dignitaries are not ready for that. So the plan B would be a covenant of states, as you mentioned, Maya. A covenant of states. I don't know whether he called it League of Nations, but something like this. And if you want, the United Nations, the second try, is a covenant of states. Not less, but not even more. And that's the pain. So I stop here.
Wow, thank you. That's quite an interesting take. Basically, arguing that we're already at the world Kant wants. Yes.
As we are here meeting in Berlin as a big festivity, 300 years Immanuel Kant, and at 8 o'clock, Olaf Scholz, our Chancellor, is giving a speech for perpetual peace in this world. I would have loved to have the script before, but tomorrow we can read what the Chancellor is thinking and compare what we are thinking in this session.
Yes, good. You have good food for thought. Perfect. Okay, then I'll turn directly now to Louisa.
Thank you, Aston, and thank for this opportunity and for this initiative. I would like to go back to the issue of perpetual peace, a little bit work on what Maya was already stating. As you know, Kant political thought is a cornerstone in federalism, in political federalism, and it is exactly because of the analysis that Kant did of the concept of peace. His thought has already been recalled, is a coherent system, and from a certain point of view, needs some fundamental postulates. Among them, there are freedom, there is the possibility of creating a situation where in the end you arrive, it's a sort of end of history that Kant postulates, where you arrive to abolish the violence and affirm the rule of law. In this long process, which is made of many steps and contradictions, but in the end, you see this rationality, which is also a postulate for the ethic behavior of mankind. Otherwise, it's impossible to have postulate ethics if you don't imagine that there are conditions where the freedom and the free will of the people can express through this behavior. But going to peace, which is the essence of our speech today, peace is not a state of nature, states Kant, but it must be established through institutions. And this is what is most important. Peace coincides with the state very schematically. And in order to, the state realizes the peace internally. And where you don't have the peace, the state, you don't have peace, you have a sort of state of perpetual war, which can be also diplomatically carried out, but you never have peace. You can have a truce, nothing more than that. And it's always a state of nature where you have to prepare to use the violence and prepare to use force. And where many of the energies of mankind are devoted in this conflict, perpetual conflict. The establishment of peace coincides with the establishment of the state at world level. And he's very precise on that. He's very precise, and I think this is the fundamental concept that from where we learn that building unification means building institutions that are able to create a monopoly of violence and the monopoly of rule of law, in the sense that rule of law become enforced by democratic institutions. This is the fundamental point when we talk about peace. Kant, to go a little bit quickly, also have very clear ideas of the conditions necessary to establish such a system of which brings states to give up their wild freedom, as he calls it, and to enter into a pact, which is a pact not in the sense of a simple cooperation, but I would say that the language of Kant and the words used, the wording from Kant is not so much precise, because it was a new concept that he was referring to, and had no example, historical example, nor political thinking already elaborated on that. But if you arrive to the substance, it's very clear that you think that this fedus is exactly the pact that gives way to a federal state, where you have then a constitution which rule the new political community as a federal state, a global federal state. Now, this is a model, but it's more than a model. It's also a way to explain why, when you don't have institutions, you have not arrived to peace yet. Now, the conditions that Kant postulates for forcing the states to give up their absolute sovereignty and enter into this fedus is, if we translate with modern words, interdependence. Kant calls it the broadening of trade, the convergence of interests, in a certain sense, of the different states that get richer from this global trade and become interdependent from this point of view. So this allows the interests of the different states to converge. The other conditions that he imagined is war becoming so much destructive that it becomes a suicide in a certain sense. And we have a very good example on that with the atomic weapons, of course. And then there is the third conditions, which has already been mentioned, and it is that all governments must become democratic. He calls republican. This is a way to express the same concept at the time. And this is another absolute conditions, because democratic governments are the only ones who have the interest and also the possibility to understand the interest of entering into a pact with other states. Now, if we look where we are today, we have the first two conditions are true, the interdependence and also the destructiveness of war. But we see that they are not enough to force the states to enter into a pact. And we also have some enormous common problems that should make it even easier to understand the rationality of creating common institutions to rule together on certain matters and in front of certain challenges which are common. But the difficulty, and we have now the European example in history, the difficulty of bringing states and governments to give up their sovereignty is profoundly rooted in the laws of politics. It's not a simple will, good or bad will. It's not a simply that matter, but it's also conditions of the need for the power to survive, the intrinsic logic of the political power when it's not when it is towards external. As you was saying, you always have the possibility of war, not only with nationalism as such, but with the existence of powers that are born and work for the safety of their internal community. So this is the difficulty that we experience both at world level, and that we have experienced, we are still experiencing in the European process of unification, which I think can teach us some lessons, which are very important also in view of the development of international institutions. As you already said, today national institutions are only a volunteer, are only based on volunteer adhesion by the nations, and the fact that you have non-democratic powers pursuing hegemonic goals, of course, is the first obstacle today to the development of international institutions which might build on cooperation and create at least grounds for also integration on certain matters by the states. So this is the first problem that we are facing, and that will take a long road on certain sense. What I think an important lessons that we can learn from what the European process has showed is that the start with some institutions on specific sectors can be very important in order to start bringing states to merge sovereignty and power of ruling certain matters. The other one is the importance of the continental process of unification, to create these big regional federations that are the basis also for world unification. Now, in view of United Nations and the process of reforming them and arriving to transform them somehow in a democratic supranational institution, I think that we must keep in mind all these lessons and identify which might be also the driving forces and those states, those powers that might be interested in really implementing this view of international relationship. And this is also another lesson that we could draw from the European unification process, because if we had realized the federation in Europe, it would be a model, but it would be also a driving force of a different conception of international relationships, bringing this model of federalism, of common institutions, gradually maybe establishing, but would understand what it means to merge sovereignty between different countries. I stop
Thank
here.
you. Thank you very much. Very insightful. Lots of things to take away from that. Before we get into the discussion, then I'll turn it over to our last panelist, then Fernando, for your thoughts.
Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's exceptional because the thinker we are speaking about was exceptional, a milestone in the human thinking that crossed all the centuries till now. Let me start by recalling your attention to a paradox. Kaliningrad, the place of the world where Kant was born and lived all his life, is now a Russian part in some way, in the middle of enormous conflict caused by imperialist conceptions of the world. And let me recall also to the phrase that is at our magazine, The Federalist Debate, which is Kant: the establishment of a perfect civil constitution depends on the problem of governing the external relations among states through law. This is very clear. This is the flag over the heads of the founders of the World Federalist movement and the Union of European Federalists. So, world peace through world law. And this was 1947, and here we are still trying to make this war a little more pacific, democratic, and human. Well, the thing I wish to everybody is we are speaking about Kant, but everybody who is in the panel knows more about Kant than me. But let me recall also your attention to something new, which is I wouldn't say a Kant disciple, but there is a very important person in the history of my country, Argentina. He was the person who wrote the basic elements of our constitution, which was very close to the constitution of the United States, and then to the Federalist founding fathers. I don't know if he has read Kant, but he wrote a very interesting book, The Crime. I'm speaking about Juan Bautista Alberdi. He's very famous here, but everybody remember his contribution to the national constitution, but nobody remember his exceptional book, The Crime of War. He wrote speaking about the war between the France and the Prussians, which was the antecedent of the First and the Second World War. And he wrote a lot. I don't know if he has studied Kant, but let me just read some of the pieces of this Kantian argument, so strong, particularly in a country like Argentina, who is very far away from the center of Europe. He wrote, "The world has ceased to be a name and has become a possible and practical fact since the press electricity, and steam have taken charge of collecting the votes of the whole world on all the debates that affect the world, facilitating its impartial scrutiny and making it known by thousand trumpets of the free press. This is another Kant's phrase that I love so much, in which Kant wrote about what happens in any part of the world is becoming visible all over the world, which is an anticipation of internet, if you wish, but it's a crucial part of the building of a global society. And Alberti wrote, the right is one for the whole human race, by virtue of the very unity of the human race. The foreigner signifies the whole. The citizen is the exception. Human law is the common and general rule. National or civil law, the exceptional vanity of that rule, and etc., etc. And after that, he arrives to the same place where we were, with Kant and the flag over the World Faith Movement founding fathers. What cause will mainly put an end to the repetition of cases of war between nation and nation, the same that has put an end to quarrels between individuals on the same state, the establishment of tribunal substituted to the parties for the decision of the differences. I could go further, but I wish to mention the last one. It is necessary that the nation of which humanity composes form a kin of society or unity, so that the union becomes capable of a more or less common legislation and government. This is Alberti, and it shows us in some way a spirit of the epoch, which is very different to the present one. Well, what else? I will finish. I was tempted to say something about another hero of this thinking, which is Lionel Robbins, but I don't want to be to extend too much my intervention. But I see some continuity in this with Kant, 18th century thinker, Alberti in the following 19th century, and Robbins maybe in the 20th century. And another thing that I think I called the panel to think about is this change, because at the beginning of the World Federalist thought, the idea was about a world state, to build a world state, to repeat at the global level the same process at the national level. But of course, what happened at the beginning of the past century, the criminal character that many states had, genocide and war and atomic bombs, etc., created a very justified sense of to be afraid of the creation of a world state would be worse even that the so we change it from world state to the idea of world government, and then we change it to another thing, which is this idea of a democratic and federal global governance. This is something we should explore in terms of the way of conciliating the building of institutions at the global level. I think that there is a missing word on this, which is a republic. Maybe this is because the use of the word by the American Republican Party, but the republic, the institution, the law, the citizens' rights, etc., for me have a very comprehensive word, which is republic. Last reflection, what about Kant in the world after September 11? it was clear that after the fall of the Berlin Wall, we had an extraordinary period in which the hope for a more unified and peaceful world was the spirit of the epoch. But it finished maybe this is arbitrary, but maybe at September 11, and with the economic crisis, and now with all these conflicts all over the world, which menaces, according to some, I don't agree, but some of the some important intellectuals are speaking about the possible beginning of a third world war. Of course, maybe this is too much, but nobody knows. When the process of war starts, nobody knows what happens next. So we should think about this as World Federalists. I mean, are we, because it's very different how to act, how to speak, how to be in a pre-World War than in a post-World War. The two processes that were maybe the seeds of a global federal order were born after the war. I mean, the United Nations at the global scale and the European Union, which is the most Kantian model we have reached as human beings. So the problem is where we are in the middle of the historical process, because the menaces of the future are very, very concerning, and we have to think how to be Kantians, how to be World Federalists in such a mess. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you all for those very insightful statements. I've definitely learned a lot myself, and it's a pleasure really to get all of your opinions on this topic. Yeah, I would there's a lot of different ways we can take this conversation. I'm mostly curious about this role that we have today, and particularly with the Summit of the Future, because this is sort of a political moment that I think was originally the idea came at a different time in geopolitics, and now it's sort of carrying forward with institutional inertia within the United Nations. But the question remains, what will the outcome be of such a reform process? We as World Federalists look to these, it's hard to even call it a reform process, but a reflection upon the current system that the UN is doing as an opportunity and as a reason to have hope. And yet at the same time, we have states such as Germany, which is a large arms exporter to many countries. We have the Chancellor of Germany, as was mentioned, talking about Kant and the role of perpetual peace and all these things, while at the same time exporting weapons around the world, and sort of touching on what Luisa was talking about, how political power sort of trumps the normative good here. So it doesn't necessarily matter how rational any actor may feel, the political moment overrides it, and the political power is stronger than this good or bad normativity. So I'd be curious to ask you, I'm not sure if you're all familiar, but the sort of zero draft of the Pact for the Future that's supposed to come out of the Summit of the Future did mention reforming the United Nations Security Council, which, as we all know, is a major pillar of the system. And reforming it is an idea that many countries align with, particularly the countries that are not permanent members of the Security Council. This zero draft was basically edited, and this part was somewhat removed, and then the writers of this zero draft, which I believe is Germany and Namibia together, said that they're going to come up with something to replace those words. I believe the quote is to come up with something by June. So I'm curious. I would open this to all of you, and you of course are welcome to comment on the things that other people have said as well. So we've heard lots of different ideas, but one question I would like to throw out there is do you think that the Security Council reform is in any way possible? And if so, what could it possibly look like?
Good. I think the Security Council is the biggest anachronism that we can imagine. 3 European states, China and the US. Good European states, I take Russia on board, looking on the global south. No India, no Africa, no Latin America. I mean, this is since many, many years, this is the anachronistic moment, the most anachronistic moment, besides the veto that the 5 powers enjoy. Yeah, one has to try it again and again to overcome this present situation in the Security Council, no doubt. No? There are different models floating around. I don't know which one will be the next step to open it up. But this is definitely not enough. It speaks for itself that the zero draft only has the Security Council as reform necessity. We have need a reform of the General Assembly. We need a reform of the International Court of Justice. We need a new refreshing dynamic in the United Nations, implying more directly and indirectly the citizens. Yeah? And I think World Federalists, we have proposed to have next to the General Assembly a parliamentary assembly, have maybe a World Citizens Initiative, so give citizens a voice. What has been done was the Youth Office in the UN. This is quite recent. It's quite new, quite modest as well, because the UN lacks then the funds to be really in a bigger way helpful. But anyway, they have discovered the youth, and I must say future generations. We will see what that makes it with the Pact for the Future that should be concluded in September, whether there are new ideas, let's say, by all the crises that we have, how we manage this in common. The global political scenery is not very helpful. Well, we had the Millennium Declaration. Everybody promised to reform. We had the United Nations 75th birthday declaration. Yeah, and now Secretary General Antonio Guterres is struggling like hell to get the machine a little bit forward. With the SDG summit last year, the summit for the future this year, the social summit next year. And maybe the best that we can have by the document in September, that it is a starting point and not the end of a process, it's the beginning of a process. And as well, we know that in 1945, some delegations have not been satisfied with the outcome. There is this Article 109 that at the latest 10 years after the inauguration of the Charter, there must be a revision of the Charter. And many are pushing very hard that this Article 109 is taken serious and that you open a process of reforming the UN. Yeah. Some are so desperate that they want to abolish the UN and, let's say, create a new entity on a global level. But let's be realistic, that is equally hard. So I think the UN does some good stuff, but it is by far not sufficient, matching the catastrophes and risks that we have. So reform is a must, and I hope that by September there are some possibilities to open the door for better global governance.
I don't know, maybe Maya or Luisa. Maya.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the whole process and discourses, dialogues, negotiations leading up to Summit of the Future comes back to my early point that, you know, there's just a general lack of vision and a lack of really philosophical, rational sort of thinking, you know, a Kantian logic. How do we drive the system forward in the collective good to serve humanity? Louisa earlier talked about, you know, all that is plaguing us as humanity, all the reasons why it makes, you know, perfect rational sense to have a stronger UN, a stronger international covenant with proper rule of law, for example. Yet that kind of structural insight is really lacking, alongside like a sort of moral framework or the moral imperative, and that kind of thinking around how to design just institutions and the next iteration of just institutions. And of course, this kind of thinking, a morally informed thinking, would have to inform any kind of Security Council reform. But of course, many of the proposals have been simply to add new members based on, you know, a great power kind of logic, rather than freshly looking at the institution, and making sure it's in harmony with modern standards of governance legitimacy, that it's fair, transparent, it serves all of humanity, etc. I mean, we make a proposal on Security Council model reform in our book a few years ago. So yeah, again, a lack of vision, lack of ethical sort of orientation. And just in terms of on that point, you know, the comment about political power always trumps the right, or the good. And another great philosopher who I love, Gandhi, you know, his mode of working and influencing, you know, societies, and indeed he's influenced social movements and social transformations around the world. He talked about the power of truth, and truth and nonviolence are two sides of the same coin. So I think that's, you know, back to Kantian and other ancient philosophers also, indeed, you know, saying that we're inherently ethical beings, and we are inherently morally oriented, and our institutions must be also. So I guess I'm just, yeah, I'm seeing a lack of vision, a lack of more bold structural suggestions and changes. And even around the Security Council reform, of course, that would be very healthy for the international community. But I don't see a lot of, you know, uplifting kind of views or models or thinking around, you know, how you could really have a new kind of executive body serving the whole international community.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Yeah, I'm curious. A lot of Kant's philosophy does focus a lot on the individual and the role of the sort of the ethical actor. And yet something that's been touched upon by a few of you is the role of nationalism, and how nationalism always leads to war. That was something that Joe said. And of course, we like to imagine that, you know, the ethical actor, you know, occupies the institutions, and the institutions become ethical. But of course, you also have the nationalist individual, and nationalist individuals that fill the institutions, and therefore the institution themselves become nationalist bodies. And so I guess it sort of underscores this political power moment when you're asking a sort of national political body to reform itself, or to think ethically. So there's quite an ideological component here, of course, that Kant's ideas are running up against. That you could essentially summarize it and say that his ideas don't hold much water on the international stage, and that people sort of see it as utopian. And so I'd be curious. I see this as sort of an undercurrent, or a root cause, is this sort of nationalist ideologies of various colors and shades, of course, around the world. And I'm wondering and this is probably my last question before I open the floor to our lovely audience. But what can we as World Federalists, or as activists, do to sort of address this nationalism, and what arguments can we give to those who hold these views to sort of lead them in a direction that Kant may be happy with? Maybe I can phrase it like that. Is there any comments? I'd maybe go to one of someone who has Luisa, maybe, if you want to have an answer.
Well, just some remarks, and then also Fernando probably would like to comment on this. I think I go to your question on nationalism and maybe pick up some small reflection on United Nations and reforms on that. But it's clear that the affirmation of the modern state, so the monopoly of sovereignty from state institutions, was also a moment of progress of mankind after empire, or after the anarchy of the micro diffusion of powers, which meant that there was no law established anywhere. But now we are in a different phase of history where mankind needs this unity and needs absolutely to overcome this concept of national sovereignty. Of course, rationally, it's very easy to counter, to stop this, or to argue against nationalism, because it's very clear that we have common threats. If you think Kant was thinking to the destructiveness of war, we have arrived to create atomic weapons that can destroy our Earth many times and provoke the extinction of life on Earth. So we have arrived to that point, but we have the issue of environment, which is very challenging. We have epidemics, we have interdependence also in the sense of clearly being now very much interdependent from an economic point of view. So we really experience every day that we are one community of destiny at world level. And so rationally, it's very easy to say that if we act like egoistic individuals, if individuals are state, it is even more dangerous than being simple individuals. So it doesn't make any sense not to unite in order to face a certain threat. But the point is that we don't have, we have not been able to realize this kind of model up to now. This is the importance of the European laboratory in a certain sense, because Europe started with this idea of overcoming national sovereignty, of creating a supranational sovereignty, of ending with nationalism. And only partially was successful, and not enough to become able to export, not in the imperialistic sense, but in the sense of showing and also bringing an action, a way of acting on the international stage that is driven by this internal ideology of overcoming nationalism. So the best way for us to overcome nationalism is really to take all the weaknesses of nation states and create their forms of integration that arrives to merging sovereignty. This is the limit of the United Nations in a certain sense, because it is a very clear necessity that we have these international global institutions, because we should be united against a lot of problems that we share, all peoples share. But at the same time, it's the result of a system of power among the big powers, the big nation states that are ruling in a certain sense, that are having hegemony at world level. So the problem now with the United Nations that is the result of a system of power which is over, completely over. And a new one is not able to see the light. And not having this capacity of building new multilateral global institutions, because there is no power, political power, able to have this vision that Maya was mentioning, able to see that it's rational, useful, in the interest of everybody to create forms of integration, even more than cooperation, of integration. And this is our problem today, that we are experiencing the return of imperialistic powers, thinking of expansion in an hegemonic way, through war, through conquer. And this is exactly the opposite of the possibility of building good international institutions. So this is also a concrete, I'm not going into details as Yo was doing or Maya was doing, but this is the concrete obstacle today, that there is no political will to understand that we need these common institutions in order to live better, everybody.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and I'm also reminded, and unfortunately, of what Fernando was saying with this sort of on the eve of World War III type argument, and what arguments can we say to sort of address this? What are how can arguments be stronger or more relevant in this moment? And I really liked what you said, Fernando, that what we say now would be different than what we say after such a global conflict, and that we really need to think about what arguments would hold water, what arguments would be effective in this sort of pre-war context that we may unfortunately find ourselves in. God forbid. But Fernando, I'd turn the floor over to you now if you had any comments. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Well, the fact that the Kantian experiment, the European Union experiment, started after 2 world wars makes me very pessimistic about the future, because now the Second World War was close to be fought through atomic bombs by both parts. We were very close to a real atomic disaster, and now arms are getting really stronger than them, and a new war is completely unpredictable. There is this phrase, I think it was attributed to Einstein, I don't know. He said, he wrote, who knows, this, I don't know which arms will be used in a third world war, but the following one will be disputed with stones, because nothing is going to survive, probably. And another, I wish to say a couple of things as fast as possible about nationalism. Let me be a little undemocratic, unpopular thinking. The real problem is with nationalists is people are nationalists. This is very logic, because the prestige of national states was so, the national states were so important in the building of a better world in past, that it's clear they have a prestige. And the human tendency to tribalism, to be close, to be between us, it's very strong. If we were, and these are passions, these are not, this is not, so we can find a lot of arguments for the for rational thinking about this. But the problem is to interpret why all the movements towards a more cosmopolitan world, meaning the European Union, the United Nations, etc., they were part of the initiative of a small elite. Today, if we human beings would be rational, we will look to the world and see what is the place in which you prefer to live, in which condition. And everybody has to say European Union, you know, democracy and human rights and peace and blah, 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 blah. And this is the best continent to live in now. And it was the worst continent to live in because the unification, you know, at the beginning of the past century, Europe was the place of war, genocide, tyrannies. So what changed? It's very clear. It was the integration, supranational integration, European institution, and blah, blah, blah. Let's do it, and so on. If we were rational, that would be the road. But we are not rational. We are passional, and we are linked to our homeland, our flag. And this is you don't need to argue about that. You have just to sign the national anthem, and that's it. And that's a real problem in this moment in which the world is becoming, unpopular opinion and democratic opinion, the world is becoming or was becoming more democratic, and it was at the same time becoming less cosmopolitan. This is a problem of a balance that we need to solve. How? Well, we have found a couple of strategies about institutional building. The United Nations strategy and the European Union strategy. The European Union strategy is you want to be part of the club, you have to be democratic. That's a possibility. The United Nations is the opposite. You be part of the club and let's get democratic together. But the problem is if you open the charter, you are now open a Pandora box. I have to remember you that at the United Nations, the state which is in charge of female rights is Saudi Arabia, and about human rights, Iran. So, and it's not about the United Nations. I'm defending the United Nations. It's national states. I'm speaking here in Argentina using this phrase. No es la ONU, son los estados nacionales, estúpido, as Bill Clinton said. It's not about the United Nations. The United Nations is an international organization. They create a forum, you have the votes, if you choose the chair. If you choose the chair, Saudi Arabia, to defend female rights, so the problem is not the structure, the problem is about national state. And this is a big problem. And this is a big problem. So what is it for the future? The United Nations Parliamentary Assembly strategy by Andreas Bummel and Joe Leinen strategy, I am a supporter, of course. Let's do it, let's try. The reform of the United Nations Charter might be, who knows? Nobody knows. But there is another one, which is the Alliance of Democracy. This was another strategy, the European Union strategy. First, you have to be democratic. Then we expand. We started back 6. Now we are 27. And see, what about this at the level of the world? What about alliance of democracy between the European Union, United States, and Japan, and I don't know, and so on. So nobody knows because, you know, United States, if tomorrow Trump comes back to the presidency, that will be a problem. But nobody knows if you constitute an alliance of democracies, you have then an alliance of autocracies, and then you have and you compact China and Russia on the other side. So nobody knows. We are in such a complex and changing universe that it's very difficult to think about, and we need to think about. I think maybe the strategy of the Alliance of Democracy, that was an idea by Bertrand Russell, defended this after the Second World War, and Biden put this on the table. So we should consider this strategy. If we are going to a new war, I wouldn't say the Third World War, but a big conflict, maybe the Alliance of Democracy is something rational. So Spinelli wrote in Ventotene the manifesto, but he started back, we are going to win the war. After we win the war, then we have another. The condition was we need to win the war. Are we going to a war, or we are not going to a war? This is something nobody knows. We should discuss, and there are too many things on this scenario to make definitive judgments, I think.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. Thank you all for your comments. I would we don't have a lot of time remaining in this call, around 14 minutes by my clock. But I would open the floor up. I see Wolfgang has his real hand up. I don't see any virtual hands. Oh, there's Tad. Okay, so first I saw Wolfgang, and then we'll go on to Tad. We'll see how many we can take. Yeah, so first to you, Wolfgang.
Thank you very much. I'm in Brussels, so I'm a European to start off with. Jo Leinen has already mentioned the problem we have with a nation, sovereignty of a nation. I think that's a core issue if you think in the future of, like the Summit of the Future. I'm proposing to find new narratives which could, in the media at least, bring people into the discussion. Like, for instance, instead of international, I would like to call it interpopular, because even the UN Charter starts with the words, we the peoples, not the we the nations. I think we can go back, and democracy, as Fernando just mentioned, of course, is demos again. The people are here at the basis. The other narrative I'm trying to introduce, and I did a book on this actually, is what I call omnilateralism instead of only multilateralism. Multi meaning many only, whereas omnibus means all, for all and by all, which for me means the peoples are represented as well by civil society at global level. And that's very important. We see the process, particularly in the COP28, the last in Dubai and others, where more and more NGOs, civil society at large have an influence, but they are not part of the formal decision-making, because here it goes back to the sovereignty of the nation again, where maybe 193 diplomats in the end as generalists decide formally what is the conclusion of the meeting there in Dubai and wherever. In the foreground, there's decision shaping with the experts, with academics, with decision makers amongst the civil society, but they have only an outside influence. Like Greta Thunberg extreme case, they have to go even into the streets to show that they have something to say in this context. So for me, the two narratives which I would propose here to enrich the discussion and change it a little bit in the public mind is to introduce, instead of international, interpopular, which as a word sounds already somewhat popular in a way, and get away from the multilateralism, which is limited to the nation state, which with the reform of the United Nations, perhaps through Article 109 and so on, could come back to the peoples as well. And I think in this context, we can introduce this idea of omnilateralism. And it's in the sense of Kant as well, because he used the German word allseitig for his perpetual peace, the Weltfrieden. And this is translated into Latin and in many of the European language as omnilateral. So omnibus, for and by all, instead of only multilateral. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those insights. Yeah, I do. I think that is an interesting term to be using it, because it does counter the nationalism inherent in when you talk about international relations. It's an interesting concept. Thank you. Next, I'll turn the floor over to, or if any of our other, I'd leave it to our panelists if you would like to respond to that before we go on to Tad.
Now, in a way, it is happening for the Summit of the Future. I'm going in 2 weeks to Nairobi, where the World Civil Society, if you want, We the People's Campaign is coming together to give its input in this process. And it's a bit contested in the civil society. Guterres called it multi-stakeholderism. So to involve different parts of society, the industry, of course, trade unions, NGOs, yeah, that is Wolfgang's omnilateralism. I think that's okay, but it doesn't solve the problem that we have. I mean, this is good to imply more people than national governments. That's the good thing about it. But we should not, let's say, fool ourselves. This is not a reform of the UN that we need.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'd say the language we use is key. But yes, of course, doesn't it directly address the monopoly of violence that so many UN member states hold, particularly outside of their own borders. I would turn it over to Tad now, before as our last question, I think, before we close.
Hello, thank you so much, Eston. I am. I have some substantive comments to make about Kant, and maybe I will, maybe I won't. But before I do, I really want to applaud this enterprise. All five of you, Eston, Maya, Luisa, Joe, and Fernando, all of whom I know and admire. It's just such a great idea. Is today the birthday, Eston? The 300th birthday? Yeah. It's you might remember, Eston, because I remember your YWF spread it around that about a year and a half ago I wrote an article on the 700th anniversary of the death of Dante. Because Dante, as I imagine people on this call know, but not a whole lot of other people know, wrote a not dissimilar book to Perpetual Peace. And I guess I just want to make the point that I think this is a great tool for our advocacy. Those of us who advocate this ancient and brilliant idea of the political, constitutional, and spiritual unification of humankind. Eston, when I was younger than you, I'm doing the math, 3 decades ago, I was the student division chair of Citizens for Global Solutions. And the thing that captivated me, and in my experience, a lot of the other students, we had about 100 students involved in CGS at that time, was when they learned not only about the intellectual coherence and power of the idea of a world republic, but then when they started to learn, oh boy, in the 1940s, people like Oscar Hammerstein and Claire Booth Luce and E.B. White and big name actors like Henry Fonda and Ingrid Bergman and Bette Davis. And then in prior to that World War II era, figures like H.G. Wells and Victor Hugo and Alfred Lord Tennyson and Immanuel Kant had all talked about this big and beautiful and brilliant idea. I have found over my years of advocacy that just conveying the intellectual heritage of this idea and how much it has been promulgated by really some of the great minds in all of the human heritage is a very powerful selling point. And I applaud you for doing it today, and I encourage us all to do it going forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. It's much appreciated. If anything, I mean, we've had so much, a bit of a downer, these meetings. How far are we from a Kantian world? We're, potentially quite far away. Quite far away. I think we could summarize. But I would maybe just go around the table to our panelists one last time. If you had any final thoughts before we close out. And I'd like to end at the quarter hour. So starting with you, Maya, if you had any final thoughts.
Sure. I guess on this note of all the resurgent terrible conflicts we see around the world, et cetera, and ecological problems, but I think there was a comment, I can't remember from what quarter, but that we haven't seen much progress on institutions at the international level. But also, for example, when I was researching for our book about efforts to reform the International Court of Justice, I found almost no proposals or efforts by states to really seriously take up that work. If anyone has heard of anybody, please let me know. But I feel like also, again, this vision, as Tad was so beautifully saying, is really powerful and has echoed down through the ages. And indeed, I think if we build proposals and advocate on these with these very strong foundations, we have to make the efforts, and that's what I've seen again and again. The focused efforts on certain institutional reforms. I mean, certainly in the rule of law area, just so lacking. And just a quick point about nationalism. And as Luisa was saying, you know, the nation state itself was an effort at unification of peoples, often disparate peoples. And scholars like Benedict Anderson have done research about, you know, how constructed nation states were. You know, these imagined created communities where there had to be a lot of energy put into crafting and establishing a national identity. So, of course, we have to make those efforts in a non-manipulative way, of course, in a very open, friendly way at the international level. And one thinker, an anthropologist, Douglas Fry, talks about peace systems and the requirements you need for a peace system. And one of them is shared, you know, shared identity, shared interdependence, shared symbols of peace, rituals of peace, supranational institutions. So like those cultural and human exchanges, media is so important, and those are really part of the glue. And Kant even talks about, you know, this cosmopolitan right of hospitality and refuge, and you know, citizens of the world. So I think that's also very powerful to establish the community bonds. We can keep working on that in various ways.
Mm. Yes, yes, and the social aspect of this all of countering nationalism and seeing ourselves more citizens of humanity as a whole. Um, yes, but to close it out, Luisa, if you have any final comments.
Just very few words on the crucial times that we are living, and next few years will really show us what path can we take if we are really going towards a third world war. I'm not so optimistic that the result might be a new rebirth of democracy after that, or if we can really build somehow desperately new, how to say, reinforce democratic institutions where they are now and where they can expand as because of their positivity, of their capacity of solving problems and of becoming also a driving force for a change in other parts. I think these years are crucial, and honestly, I think that Europe is the crossroad of this challenge, and so this is a little bit up to us to also to try to commit to win this challenge.
Yes, would be nice. Would be nice for any country or region to step forward. Fernando, your final thoughts.
Well, if you look at my experience, the Argentina nation was built after decades of civil war. We declared the independence towards Spain in 1816, let's say, and we had then 40 years of fighting with each other before we were able, with thousand destruction and death, etc., civil war for about 40 years more, in 1853, when Alberti wrote his book and we had a constitution. And the same, I could say the same for, this is at national level, at this supranational level, we could say the same about Europe. We had two world wars, basically in the European territory before we human beings were able to find a solution in something. So this is worrying when we look at the global level. If we are going to need some kind of a third world war before we establish a better structure of governance, we are really in trouble. And the problem, in my opinion, is it's very clear. It's about what I call in my books asynchrony. It's about the speed of the evolution of the different subsystems. And this is getting every year more clear. I mean, technology is fast. The world is global when we speak about technology, and the evolution is exponential. But if we look at economy, the economy is fast, but not so fast as technology, but it's faster than politics. And politics is very, very slow compared to economy and compared to technology, but it's faster than culture. Culture, the evolution of culture is very difficult. It needs a lot of time, a lot of reflection, a lot of effort. And I don't know if we have still the time for making this change, which is basic in order to change the opposite way, to change from the culture to politics to economy to the technology. And this is the situation in which we are. We need to think about sorry to extend, but my fear, I'm afraid we are still thinking too much in terms of a disappearing war, the war between the fail of the Iron Curtain, the Berlin Wall, and the fail of the towers is over. We are living in a very different world. I think we didn't reflect enough about this change in order to actualize our strategy, not our principle, but our strategy. Let's think about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I myself am, yeah, it resonates with me in particular what you say about technology moving faster, and I have somewhat of a utopian hope that we'll be able to innovate our way out of all these problems with digital democracy or something. But maybe that's as utopian as Kant. But to our last words, I'll hand it over to Joe to finish us this evening.
A wonderful session with a lot of great ideas and commitments. Now, what I want to say, look, Kant was in the area of enlightenment at his time. And I think we share that we need a new enlightenment, really recognizing that global problems need global politics and global structures to solve the problems. So in a way, of course, federalists, world federalists are pioneers in this way. And looking on the Rome Statute, as Maya was saying, it didn't came from states, it came from people and NGOs. Maybe our strategy could be to form again a coalition, a global coalition around a key global problem. Yeah, reform of Security Council, I would not advise to do. That is not our, let's say, issue. But there are others where we could create a global movement again to push that, world republic a bit forward. War or not war, I mean, this is speculation. I tend to be optimistic that the danger to destroy everything with a new war is so big, that at the end, these weapons are not used. And we have them since 70 years. I was always against nuclear weapons, head of the peace movement in Germany and Europe to abolish them. But in a way, you could see that so far the deterrence has at least avoided that the one side is using them because they know the other side would use them as well, and then everything is dead. So that's not a very good outlook. But let's say let's form a global citizens movement around key ideas that are common to us, and hope that this will fly and be a catalyst for the broader reform of global governance that we need. Thank you, Ethan, for this wonderful session.
Of course.
And all the participants.
Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for this amazing and insightful conversation. I wish we could keep going. I would love to continue this over lunch. It'd be amazing to sit with you all in person. But thank you very much for joining us this evening or today, this afternoon for wherever you are. And stay tuned for more webinars in the future. And thank you. Thank you all very much. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Kant's birthday.
Thanks to you again, really.
Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
So.
Bye. Bye.